For the unwary pilot, the B-26 Marauder could be a death trap. In the rush to gear up for the war, it was hastily entered into service and was foolishly given to inexperienced pilots. Its nicknames included the Widowmaker, the Baltimore Whore, the Flying Coffin, the B-Crash, and the Flying Prostitute, so named because it had no visible means of support. Indeed, the regularity of crashes by pilots training at MacDill Field, up to 15 in one 30-day period, led to the catchphrase, "one a day in Tampa Bay." The B-26 Marauder was indeed built for speed and was a highly strung, unforgiving airplane that needed to be tamed by the most experienced pilots. At 56 pounds per 2 feet, it had the highest wing loading of any American World War II airplane, 40% higher than that of the B-25. With a landing speed of 140 miles per hour, it was too much airplane for the novice to handle. During the 1942 Truman Committee hearings, Martin admitted to the B-26 wing load issues and very nearly lost their contract to supply the B-26. So why, given its initial track record, did the U.S. military team up with Martin and expend so much effort in propaganda to promote the Martin B-26 Marauder as safe? And just how successful was this attempt? But it wasn't just the wing load that was a problem. The Curtiss propellers also caused several crashes. The props would fail and flatten out and go into a runaway condition. This was particularly dangerous when it happened during takeoff. Soon the trainee pilots, legitimately concerned for their safety, were refusing to fly the airplane. To protect their reputation, Martin and the U.S. Army Air Force made an all-out effort to restore confidence in the B-26, and thus a combined and concerted propaganda offensive was undertaken. They brought in the famous stunt pilot Vincent Squeak Burnett and Jimmy Doolittle to promote the airplane. Doolittle years later remarked, "The B-26 was an unforgiving airplane, and it was killing pilots because it never gave them a chance to make mistakes. General Arnold wanted me to check into the problem and recommend whether it should be continued to be built or not. I checked it over, flew it, and liked it. There wasn't anything about its flying characteristics that good piloting skills could overcome. I recommended that it be continued to be built, and it was." Quite an admission, but at the time he was flying demonstrations at MacDill Army Airfield, which featured takeoffs and landings with only one engine, all to convince novice pilots to lose their reluctance and continue their training in the B-26. The U.S. Army Air Force also commissioned a B-26 training film, with actors portraying how easy it was to fly the plane, even on one engine. I have posted this video separately and included a link in the description below. The U.S. Army Air Force and Martin also mounted a written press-based propaganda attack with recruitment posters featuring the B-26 and paid advertorials in publications with high circulations like Popular Mechanic, which featured articles on the success of the B-26 at war. But perhaps the most blatant attempt to shame the male trainees back into the B-26 cockpit was the training of 17 women pilots to demonstrate the ease of flying the B-26. These were no novice pilots, however. They were WASPs, Women Air Force Service Pilots. To qualify to be a WASP, the women required a commercial flying license, 500 hours of flight time, and cross-country flying experience. And the 17 selected already had many more hours of experience in military aircraft, ferrying them across the nation. So there was little fear they might also crash. It was all a losing effort, though. The airmen's, both trainees and active dissatisfaction with the B-26 was leaking to the press and politicians. Under the scrutiny of the Truman Commission, a special military board grounded the plane in April 1941 to decide whether it would remain in production. Martin and the U.S. Army Air Force now had no option but to admit to and fix the issues. The airplane was redesigned with an increased wingspan of 71 feet, from 65 feet, with a corresponding increase in wing area of 659 square feet. The vertical stabilizer was increased in height to compensate for the longer wingspan. The longer wing was added on the 982nd aircraft from the Baltimore plant and on the first Omaha-built B-26C. On later models, the angle of incidence was increased and the nose gear was raised for better takeoff performance, which also increased the propeller ground clearance. Landing gear problems were corrected by an improved heat treatment process of metal components, and the hydraulic system was improved. After corrections were made to the design and crews were provided additional training, the board recommended continuance of production. Unremarkably, the training incident rate fell dramatically. And there you have it. In war, hasty decisions are made and mistakes are made. Although decision-makers know better, they often had no other choice than to use what was available. But in this case, as in many, the attempted cover-up was worse than the crime. B-26 production ended in 1945 with a total of 5,266 aircraft being produced, and its tarnished reputation stayed with the airplane. Most Marauders were unceremoniously scrapped, leaving few survivors behind. As hastily as it was put into service, it was removed just as quickly, eventually even losing its designation, B-26, to the Douglas A-26 Invader.